You've probably seen them by now blocking roads and bridges, twerking, literally burying their heads in the sand, which is kind of ironic, arresting broccoli, gluing themselves to trains, dumping fake blood all over things.
Going to be pouring the blood so that symbolically it's like the blood of the children that would be shed because of climate change, because it's such an issue that's not really being combated at the moment.
And staging funerals for Mother Earth and mock human sacrifices, which they call die-ins.
The Red Brigade symbolizes the blood that connects all of us. It's the blood that connects humans, species, all of us, to the earth.
Extinction Rebellion, aka XR, is the latest supposedly grassroots movement to sweep the planet, including at last count at least 348 groups in 248 cities in 59 countries around the world.
Climate change activists blocked roads in central London today as part of the 2 weeks of planned civil disobedience. This was organized by a group called Extinction Rebellion.
The government has known for 30 years it needs to act. It's failed to do so. So now we're declaring a rebellion. We're inviting people to take civil disobedience like this today, pouring blood, causing criminal damage in front of Downing Street, to shame them into action and to show people that we're willing to sacrifice our liberty in order to bring this attention.
Formerly launched on Halloween 2018, so just over a year ago, and coinciding with the rise of media climate change darling Greta Thunberg, XR has managed to raise in a very short amount of time millions of dollars to take to the streets and protest that nothing is being done about the Earth's imminent destruction due to man-made climate change.
Ice caps are melting because of you and your stupid car!
Call me a jaded cynic, but I've lived on this planet long enough to witness the rise and fall of many of what we are told are supposedly grassroots movements, which always come across as highly organized and very well funded with an awful lot of free time on their hands for just some random people mad about something and desiring a change. But this particular movement, this one is quite different from the movements we've seen in the past.
Nothing living is safe. Climate breakdown will have an...
As the Extinction Rebellion echoes the going propaganda that we're currently undergoing a sixth mass species extinction, XR is calling for at least 3% of the population to achieve system change because, quote, no regime in the 20th century has managed to stand against an uprising which has had the active participation of 3.5% of the population involved, end quote.
We're drawing attention to the planetary emergency
but they're actually
that we're in.
they're just having a good old party whilst causing massive disruption to Londoners. I don't hear any protest.
While the average person cannot afford to quit their job and spend hours blocking traffic to try to get a point across, that's exactly what the XR website is openly calling for people to do. And after blatantly being told it's an apocalypse and our time is up, a lot of people are actually doing it. On the group's official website, which comes complete with a downloadable, quote, Rebel Starter Pack and a Rebel Agreement, a section on, quote, Why We Rebel has poetically summed up nearly every issue humanity faces in one long, flowery mission statement that sounds like something straight out of the Lorax meets the nature-worshipping cult of Midsommar. But more on that in a moment. Celebs, politicians, elite investors, and media outlets have all quickly jumped on board to fund and promote the group. But since when does that happen anyway? Major donors are said to include George Soros, the daughter of late Senator Robert Kennedy, Rory, Vivienne Westwood's son Joe Corey, an underwear and dildo tycoon worth a reported $48 million, the European Climate Foundation, which funnels money from far-left American philanthropic foundations, Greenpeace, of course, the Tides Foundation, and Swiss asset management company Furka Holdings have all heavily funded this group. There's also Eileen Getty, whose family fortune came from oil just by the way, who donated a reported £485,000 to the Climate Emergency Fund, which in turn gave more than £320,000 to the Extinction Rebellion. Sir Christopher Hone, one of the UK's wealthiest men, is another major donor, giving a reported £50,000. And of course, the band Radiohead also donated £300,000 to the group and even authorized XR to use the song Idiotech for their new promotional video, even after they were hacked and extorted by the group for some of their unreleased material. But that's another story. They've also gotten guidance from Trevor Nielsen, a consultant to major Hollywood celebrities who works on burnishing their images. He's been advising the XR group on their public relations. All of these donations, as well as small and medium donations, are going to fund the enormous expenses of the Extinction Rebellion. Their finance coordinator, Andrew Medhurst, told the Huffington Post that he expected the protest just in October 2019 alone to cost, quote, the best part of £1 million. Elaborating to reporters, I hope there's a funding boost in October because I'm relying on approximately £15,000 to £20,000 a day to pay for all of this. All of this includes an estimated £300,000 during its October protest for events and tech, another £200,000 for art displays, posters, banners, superglue, handcuffs, another £100,000 to £150,000 for media and propaganda messaging, and not to mention the cost of feeding 20,000 protesters 3 times a day for 2 weeks, along with stages, toilets, power and sound equipment, etc.
Building a bench for people to basically sit around and just hang out and chill out.
These are massively expensive protests. They're not grassroots. They're not spontaneous. And, you know, I mean, what does that kind of money tell you? Who has that kind of money for a protest? Why are they funding it so much? This is unlike any natural so-called grassroots movement you've ever heard of. I mean, what kind of protests cost that kind of money? Who has that kind of money and organizational strength? Does it really look authentic to you?
Just here facilitating peaceful protests at the moment. We're literally going around and talking to them. As you'll see, there's lots of officers around. We're chatting to the protesters. So far, they've had music and then they've gone and had their sort of festival in the road.
By now, people have become pretty familiar with the movement's logo, a symbol that looks like an hourglass inside of a circle. Reportedly, this is meant to stand for their message that time is running out for the planet. The group drew outrage a few weeks ago when they defaced the Wiltshire chalk horse with their logo, just a few months after local school children had finished painstakingly rechalking it. For its part, a group spokesperson replied that he would make no apologies for upsetting people, and that the logo was placed on the horse to highlight, quote, that we are destroying the planet we live on. What XR actually ended up destroying in the process was the children's joy at having restored their monument and their faith in adults to respect them in general. As the story goes, this logo was designed all the way back in 2011 by an anonymous London street artist known only as ESP, who admits that the symbol came from research into the history of symbols, including runes and medieval alchemy symbols, among others. This particular symbol is a Degas rune turned on its side. Runes were used by ancient Germanic people as a written language before Roman script was adopted, the oldest inscription dating back to 45 AD. They were also used in the practice of runic magic. According to Dr. Thomas Carlson, in Old Norse and Germanic languages, the word rune signifies secret, mystery, or secret whisper, and that at first, runes were not used in normal writing, but were exclusively magical symbols used to express the hidden forces of the universe, which have exoteric and esoteric or occult meanings. So there's the superficial language aspect that everyone's familiar with when it comes to runes, and then there's this deeper hidden level of meaning that's tied to occult spirituality. Degas represents illumination and awakening, the rune of culmination. It represents a zenith, the highest point of a circle and beginning of a new cycle, a day rune that describes one who leaves the old behind and attains a new consciousness through rebirth. Dr. Carlson writes that Degas, quote, is similar to the butterfly and represents the step out of the chrysalis and into a new reality. And Degas is a rune that we've been increasingly seeing more and more in the past year. This exact rune should be familiar to any of you who watched our Midsommar breakdown. It's the exact same rune in the exact same position that the main character Danny wore on her shoes prior to the Maypole dance where she's crowned May Queen before she joins the film's nature-worshipping death cult and is illuminated. The movie has a heavy repeated message of humans needing to be one with and live in balance with nature, even though the cult featured in the film has to resort to literal human sacrifice in order to do so. This same rune, and actually the same theme of human sacrifice for nature, was also prominently featured in another 2019 film, Godzilla King of the Monsters, for anyone who bothered to wade through all of the apocalyptic climate change propaganda in order to watch another Godzilla movie. It was the logo for the secretive Titan studying group appropriately named Monarch, a member of which, paleobiologist Dr. Emma Russell, joins with eco-terrorists and awakens Monster Zero, an ancient alien which seeks to use Titans to terraform Earth, because she says she wants to, quote, heal the Earth from the damages humans have caused, by unleashing giant monsters to mass murder millions of people and destroy major cities across the world in order to rebuild them.
We never dared to confront the truth.
Which truth?
Humans have been the dominant species for thousands of years, and look what's happened. Overpopulation, pollution, war. The mass extinction we feared has already begun, and we are the cause.
Interesting to note is the fact that even though this movie was released in May 2019, a fake BBC News article shown in the end credits discusses the Amazon being on fire, and it's dated August 2019, somehow predicting the actual Amazon fires of August 2019 down to a matter of days. Just like it is used in these films, this symbol is an actual magical symbol being used to help realize the XR movement's stated goals.
Extinction Rebellion have chosen key thoroughfares in central London and given each of them a theme. But those sites also have the happy coincidence of describing the Extinction Rebellion logo. Nice touch.
In fact, in an Extinction Rebellion action policy document, XR writes that one of their aims is, quote, to build structure, community, and test prototypes in preparation for the coming structural collapse of the regimes of Western democracies, now seen as inevitable due to stored-up crisis, thus preparing a foundation to transform society. As blogger Sally Prue pointed out, she thinks it's rather clever the group is using Degas, a rune associated with, quote, great change, but when runes are reversed or flipped on their side, it changes the meaning. Degas is such a positive rune that it's not supposed to have a reverse or negative meaning. When you reverse runes, it gives them a negative connotation. However, Prue says she's seen the turning of Degas on its side interpreted as a wish for chaos, darkness, and dominance, and that it was popularly used in Viking curses. So it's as if they're twisting the power of a positive symbol to bring great change out of chaos. I mean, where have we heard that before? Prue goes on to write, really all I can say is that if you're trying to start a conversation based on scientific evidence, then it might be best to keep away from using magical symbols. And that's what runes have traditionally been. Very powerful, ancient, magical symbols. It should also be noted that Extinction Rebellion goes by the letters XR for short, not ER. Where ER might make sense at first glance considering they're talking about what they deem to be a climate emergency, they've instead opted for XR. And I just think that's interesting because R also stands for reality, such as with AR is augmented reality or VR is virtual reality. And if you think about that in terms of XR, it's like a new layer of meaning about the destruction of current reality in order to usher in a new reality. A spell is being cast to create a new world order, and actual magical symbols are being used to give it power. How can I just say that? It sounds crazy to say, right? Well, because one member straight up wrote that the group was, quote, harnessing the power of rituals. In a missive on open democracy called How Myth, Ritual, and Magic Sustain Social Movements Like XR, Member Timothy Stacy describes what a person who joins a movement like XR goes through. It's a transformation. Stacy was apparently arrested during an XR protest in Amsterdam a few weeks ago. And he wrote, "What had made me so loyal to a platoon I had known so briefly, during not more than a few short meetings in the weeks leading up to the protest? The answer, at least for me, lies in the power of religion-like elements such as myths, rituals, and magic to sustain political and social movements. Religion-like elements can have a profound influence over even the most irreverent and critically minded among us. Progressives ignore this power at their peril." So how can we use this power to promote the cause of justice and transformation and to hold progressive movements together in the face of the widespread tendency to splinter and burn out? Here are 3 key tools that should be part of our organizing toolkit. The first, he says, is the power of shared myth. Extinction Rebellion's main myth is the impending eco-apocalypse and mass extinction event, which must be mitigated by urgent action. Stacy says this story has already become crucial to many people's identity, tipping them towards nihilism, anxiety, and depression. But for many of us, it does the opposite. It compels us to act and act now.
And before long, it's going to be uncontrollable. It's going to be too late.
The second is harnessing the power of rituals.
So we're in Marble Arch, and you can hear birdsong. And a ceremony starts to happen in front of us. And it's an opening ceremony. And they call in the elements. And something happens, like I'm hearing it for the first time. I'm experiencing it. I'm feeling it.
For the 2 weeks of protests scheduled in October 2019, Extinction Rebellion opened this ceremony by lighting what they called a beacon of truth. A page on the group's website directed people to come dressed for ceremony and to bring a lantern and a small symbol of harvest. To, quote, invite the dance of universal peace and celebrate the planet's elements by lighting a beacon of truth, a fire, to initiate the 2 weeks of rebellion in London that would kick off similar protests around the world.
13 beacons of truth are now going to be lit to bring us into our wholeness, into our togetherness, into our oneness.
The fire would then be carried in lanterns to key locations throughout the city where they would remain lit during the 2 weeks of the October Rebellion event.
11 men, we've got our lead man. 11 men and 11 women, please, to step forward. So this fire and this circling of the masculine and feminine principle is what we are bringing together so that they may spiral, so that these energies spiral into full being as one.
The press release describes how, quote, in every crisis lies the possibility of transformation.
For these new, yet ancient times, for us to remember who we really are, because we are all of it. We are all of it. We can now come together in every way. No longer do we remain separate.
It will be a moment to pause, to draw breath, to take a look inside ourselves, and step into this evolutionary moment together. Breathing together is the definition of conspiring, just by the way.
Science and spirit can come together. Masculine and feminine can come together. There is no more separation. We are saying farewell and goodbye. We are letting go of our separation.
Another XR member wrote about how at her first Extinction Rebellion meeting in London, the group participated in something called the Apocalypse Survival School. where they made smudge sticks, a bundle of herbs they selected specifically for their magical properties, and then sat around in a circle chanting for protection as they walked through the apocalypse, before discussing ways to build new myths to survive the ecological collapse.
I need you to be comfortable with a bit of chaos. Okay, dark chaos is coming, and the more comfortable we can be with it, the better.
Our Earth needs regenerative cultures on a global scale.
Back in August, Extinction Rebellion members held something called a transformance with Tapestry. It says Tapestry is a durational performance about an imaginary saint and the power of collective action. Our saint can see the future. Our saint is sacred and just trying to do their best. Our saint is not one person but many, brought to life in a durational performance which embodies regenerative culture. When the performer gets tired, another body takes their place until there are no more people willing to participate, at which point the piece ends. Protest can feel daunting when it's not clear how you can participate. In the spirit of XR, Tapestry asks for your help, a gentle introduction to the enriching power of group action. This has all the hallmarks of a magical working.
These beacons are going to circle around the outside of our gathering. And I'm going to invite all of you wonderful people, please, to visit one of the beacons and offer your blessing to the beacon of truth. I'm just going to repeat that, to offer your blessing, your prayer to one of these beacons.
Among Extinction Rebellion's 3 demands are that the government must tell the truth by declaring a climate and ecological emergency, which insinuates that the truth is the climate and ecological emergency, and yet somehow also fails to actually state that a climate and ecological emergency is the truth, if you look at the wording. They're also calling for a citizens' assembly, which is less democratic than what we actually have now, because that's a bunch of people who get together from their organization and decide on legislations that need to be put forth without going through the actual political processes that we have. They're calling this upgrading our democracy.
We upgrade our democracy.
But the most ambitious, shall we say, demand of Extinction Rebellion is that governments must reduce greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2025.
They will aim for the most extreme carbon reduction target possible, 0 carbon by 2025.
Which would mean a halt to virtually everything that humans do, from traveling to cooking. And some of their members have said that if we don't do this, billions of people are going to die.
Last week, BBC's Hard to Talk programme featured Extinction Rebellion founder Roger Hallam.
The capitalist system, the global system that we're is in the process of destroying itself, and it will destroy itself in the next 10 years.
And then this.
They've got another 50, 60, 70 years to live on this planet. By that time, there could be only 1 billion people left. That means 6 or 7 billion people have been slaughtered, starved to death.
The slaughter of global war, mass mental breakdown, mass torture, mass rape.
We're in a crisis. We're looking at the mass death of the next generation.
It's the end.
We're all going to die, and it's the end unless we actually do something ourselves.
What I have to say is important and emotional, so I've written it down and I'm going to read it to you. I want to make clear that what I'm about to say are my own views and not of all Extinction Rebellion. And it is in memory of my mum, in my mind, that I'm going to talk to you now. I am so tough. I am so tough. It's several decades since I was asked to speak in front of an audience like this. I was a top student at London School of Economics. Extinction Rebellion is not doing managed defeat. We are not just sending out emails and asking for donations. We are going to force the governments to act. And if they don't, we'll bring them down and create a democracy fit for purpose. And yes, some may die in the process. Some of us have passed through the dark night of the soul and are ready.
Again, if the Extinction Rebellion is a response to the supposedly scientifically based climate change emergency, then one legitimately has to wonder why it would be sustained and fueled by mythological, ritualistic, and magical workings. If the science is settled, quote unquote, and if this is really about a drastic ecological disaster documented by science,
billions of people are going to die. I can't believe I'm saying this.
Most scientists don't agree with this. Climate change scientists. I looked through the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the latest AR5, and the October of last year special report. I see no reference to billions of people going to die or children going to die in under 20 years.
Well, I don't think he was claiming that that was from that report.
I don't know where the scientific validity comes for that.
But so they're saying they've got science on their side. But then when they get called out on the fact that the IPCC reports don't say any of this stuff, they don't say, if we don't cut carbon emissions to zero by 2025, it's going to be the apocalypse and billions of people are going to die. That's not in there. When they get called on that, then they say, oh, the scientists are being too conservative. It's really so much worse than we're being told. So which is it? That's where the myth part of this comes in, because they're not actually going by what the science says. They're making up their own version of it and saying, well, they're just being conservative. It's really this, right? So either it's the science or it's not the science. You can't claim this science is backing you up, and then when you get called on the fact that it actually doesn't say what you're saying it says, then you turn around and say, well, they're not being honest. Well, then you don't have science to back you up. Then all you do have is a myth.
You talk weather-related disasters. There seem to be a lot of them around at the moment, and people die from them. But on the latest figures I've seen, 100 years ago, weather-related disasters killed 500,000 people a year. Today, it's 20,000 a year, a reduction of 95%. It does not lead to a death of billions. I mean, aren't you scaring people with this rhetoric?
I think there's a danger of scaring people simply because we're not taking it seriously enough, and people are feeling really, desperate that we're heard on this, and unfortunately, alarmist language works.
Then why are activists and the rest of society by extension being goaded into responding to it on the basis of highly emotional reactions and framing it as a cultural myth? A myth in quotes. That's their words. That's the words of major activists using the terms myth and ritual and magic.
As some of you already know, the largest climate protest took yesterday across the world. Many do not know where this is all rooted in. When you really understand the idea of saving the planet, this is actually rooted in nature worship, is what it's rooted in. This is rooted in nature worship. This is rooted in paganism.
Why are they using those terms? Well, stories and myths are surely more moving than cold hard facts, yes, but the media-driven conception of our world has thrown climate skeptics and doubters and anyone just generally not on board under the bus for years. They mocked and ridiculed them in spite of the ClimateGate scandal, where academics from East Anglia University were caught in leaked emails, quote, hiding the decline and stoking the fears on the basis of bunk-manipulated data.
ClimateGate is the term being used for a handful of emails stolen last month from the influential CRU. The most embarrassing email is from 1999, in which CRU's director, Phil Jones, brags that he's used a trick to hide the decline.
You've got Al Gore and various scientific, quote, experts, other celebrity activists who've long shamed doubters and try to put in their place anyone who dares to even raise questions and cast them as illegitimate, only to go on and confront the world with, you got it, quote, myths about our planetary extinction that are meant to justify severe restrictions on human activity, on travel, consumption, etc.
As the XR slogan says, to tell the truth and to act as if that truth is real.
Carbon taxes and other austerity measures have been proposed and are being implemented that will or already do affect the lives and well-being of ordinary individuals already struggling economically, many of them anyway. And we are to understand that it is on the basis of what they are projecting as a myth and a magical performance that it is as much rooted in magico-religious belief as it is in science?
Religion, really properly understood, is not about belief, but about behavior.
Is anyone else taking notice of this? Are people okay with self-righteous believers in climate disaster endorsing and pushing and promoting and shoving down people's throats these policies?
For a lot of us, protesting, marching, that's not something that we normally do, but you know what, these are times that call for us to do those things that we believe in and to march, and not just to march, because that's important to show solidarity, but then to do those things such as voter registration, get people out to vote, so that we can have people here who truly are committed to human rights, environmental rights, climate change, believe in climate change as though it's a religion, it's not a science.
Believe in climate change as though it's a religion, it's not a science.
Which are being quietly and silently implemented on the global level through the United Nations and various associated organizations through global accords. That's happening just steadily, progressively, step by step, a little more each time. They're getting nations roped into it, but publicly they admit they're pushing a cultural myth. Of course, they claim there's facts underlying that, but they're appealing to the public on the basis of a myth, a story, okay? That's a well-documented type of logical fallacy, and it should not be the basis on which society is transformed, radically transformed, I might add.
You just have the situation where the UN is pushing this idea, which, shows that this climate change thing is as much about a religion, a new materialist religion of globalism than it is about anything else.
The death and rebirth of society is being mirrored in the transformation that takes place in every individual who joins a movement like Extinction Rebellion.
The world's scientists have consensus. We need to see a rapid decline in global fossil fuel use if we are to have a hope of an inhabitable planet.
Timothy Stacy discusses this rebirth in terms of a three-stage process as outlined by French anthropologist Arnold van Gennep in what he calls his theory of ritual. It says, quote, "The first stage is one of separation from a previous status, society, or way of living. The second one is ambiguity or liminality, in which one leaves one's old life behind but is not yet incorporated into a new one. And the third stage is integration into that new identity. Rituals are key in moving people from one stage to the next. We've seen that everywhere from cults to secret societies to some religions. That's the process. It's always the same. It's always a death of the person's identity, of their ego, of what they knew, whatever, fill in the blank. And then they go through a process where they are reborn into this new identity. So while they want to do that to all of society, each individual who joins this movement is also going through that process. Not only that, but these mummer-like play and dance performances that you see them doing in the streets, or the people dressed in ceremonial red gowns that's meant to symbolize the blood of the earth, or the people walking labyrinths just as the Aztecs once did, they're pulling from cultures the world over what are sometimes ancient magical rituals and performing them in service of this global transformation that they're attempting to bring about. Brendan O'Neill is an editor over at Spiked, and he was talking about the madness of Extinction Rebellion. He referred to it as an upper middle class death cult, because that's the majority of who's there is the upper middle class. The average person who has to work a job, they don't have time to go do this. But back in October, when their big thing kicked off a month ago, he wrote, "Yesterday in London, I witnessed an eerie, chilling sight. I saw a death cult holding a ceremony in public. The men and women gathered outside King's Cross Station and formed a circle. They swayed and chanted. They preached about end times. What will you do when the world gets hot, they intoned, conjuring up images of the hellfire they believe will shortly consume mankind. They sang hymns to their god, science. We've got all the science, all that we need to change the world. Hallelujah, they sang, rocking side to side as they did so. They demanded repentance. Buy less, fly less, fry less, said one placard. And like all death cultists, they handed out leaflets that contained within them the truth. The leaflets foretell floods and fire. We're in trouble. Sea levels are rising. Africa and the Amazon are on fire. And if you question their truth, well then, like those heretics who were hauled before the Inquisition 500 years ago, you will be denounced as a denier of their revelations, a denier of their visions. Denial is not a policy, their placards decreed. Spotting me filming their spooky apocalyptic ceremony, one of the attendees waved the placard in my face, a warning from the cult to a corrupted outsider. And he goes on to talk about how this is a millenarian movement that might speak of science, but is driven by sheer irrationalism and fear, moral exhaustion, and misanthropy. It's the deflated, self-loathing bourgeois coming together to project their own psychosocial hang-ups onto society at large. Yesterday's gathering, like so many other Extinction Rebellion gatherings, was middle-aged and middle-class. Working-class people in the poor of New Delhi, Mumbai, and Cape Town, some of the cities in which Extinction Rebellion will be causing their disruptions, cannot afford to take 2 weeks off work. But then again, these protests aren't for those people. In fact, they're against those people. And he goes on to explain how they want to bring in net zero carbon emissions by 2025 in just 6 years' time, which will halt a vast array of human activity that produces carbon. People who rely on those things for work and food and warmth, he says, screw them. They're only humans. Horrible, destructive, stupid humans. And it's interesting how the focus here is how it's us humans that have gotten us into this mess. They don't seem to be focusing on things like the fact that studies show the US military is actually the biggest polluter on the planet, bar none, or the fact that mega corporations continue to poison us and the environment with cancer-causing plastic garbage when alternatives have been available since before the Industrial Revolution ever started. Are the corporations blamed for the giant plastic garbage island that's floating around in the Pacific Ocean, for example? No. The individual is blamed for buying stuff that mega corporations shouldn't even be producing in the first place because it's terrible for everyone and everything, period. I mean, this is a question I have. I understand individual responsibility, but when you drag everybody down to the point where large portions of the population are living in poverty, and then you sell them cheap plastic crap, and you mark up all of the earth-friendly products to a price that most people can't afford, what do you expect people to do? So I went on a whole thing about this the other day because it drives me crazy. Major corporations are producing a bunch of cheap plastic, chemical-laden crap and microfibers and just total BS. It's horrible for the environment. It's horrible for us to use and put in our bodies. It's just horrible. But then they sell this to everyone because they're totally allowed to do that, and that's fine, right? Then people buy it because that's what's for sale. And they assume that if it's for sale, it's probably okay. Because why would it be allowed to be for sale if it's not, you see? Then people buy it, right? And then everyone else, from the media to the environmentalists, they all come along and they shame everyone and blame everyone and yell at the people who are buying the things and hardly, if ever, address the major corporations that are producing this toxic, poisonous crap in the first place. I mean, I just got done seeing this on Wired's Instagram. This is what I'm talking about. It's a whole post about how the plastic-infused fabrics that are used to make yoga pants are shedding all these synthetic fibers. And it says, you read that, your beloved yoga pants are terrible for you. Well, why are they making horrible microfiber yoga pants that are terrible for everyone and the environment? Why is that even a thing that's being produced? Here's another one in Discover magazine. The plastic tea bags release billions of microplastics into every cup. So you've probably seen these tea bags. Some of the higher end tea comes in these tea bags now, but these tea bags, they're not always made from something like hemp. They're sometimes made from nylon or polyethylene terephthalate. Terephthalate, I'm probably not even saying that right. Most often it's made out of plastic, these tea bags that they have here. And apparently when you pour hot water onto that, it breaks down and releases billions of plastic microparticles into the tea, and then people are drinking it. It also goes into everywhere. The bottled waters, the plastic bottled water, microplastic in there.
The widespread use of BPA, its impact on breast cancer, infertility, low sperm counts, genital deformities,
and even diabetes and obesity, early menstruation, you name it. It's everywhere. If you get your blood tested, you're pretty much going to find it. It's in canned foods, plastics, food packaging, you name it. And the FDA won't ban it, even though Canada and European countries have.
That's going into everything. I mean, all of this stuff is producing these nanoparticles, these nanoplastic particles, which are bad for everything. They're bad for humans, they're bad for animals, they're bad for the environment in general, the ocean, everything. It's just bad. Why are they putting tea in something that breaks down into nanoplastic particles that's bad for everything? Why is that a thing that can even be sold to people? So they're saying it's your fault because you bought it. How about don't make that stuff to begin with? Right? But let's not focus on that, right? It's your fault because you used a plastic straw, okay? And my question is, if any of these people really want to change anything, why are they ever holding those people accountable for that? Because that's the issue. Because when they do, you get the anti-Monsanto protests, which I think in large part there was a lot of actual natural grassroots going on in that, because those people didn't get millions and millions and millions of dollars, and they were demonized everywhere. You don't see that being promoted the way that this is being promoted.
Climate change activists blocked roads in central London today.
The way that this is being funded, the way that this has been organized, you just don't see it. If these corporations produce the earth-friendly products, people would be buying that instead, you know? But they don't, or when they do, they mark it up to a price that most people cannot afford. So your being responsible, quote unquote, is whether or not you're willing to spend 2 to 3 to 5 times as much for something that's better, which most people are not going to be able to afford.
You're talking there about one of the things being this very, very ambitious target to bring down those emissions. I mean, we're going to need some pretty radical policies, aren't we, if we're going to get there? And it's going to be personal sacrifices as well, isn't it? I mean, do we need to think about whether we're eating meat? Do we need to think about a complete ban on cars? Do we need to think about fast fashion? What are the radical things that you think we need to change now?
Well, I think it's an understanding of like what we personally take. In terms of the meat ban and stuff like that, we need to eat locally.
In the past year, we've seen everything from the promotion of eating bugs to reduce the effects of food production on climate change, to pro-eugenics biologists like Richard Dawkins applauding lab-grown human tissue culture meat.
They're making our food out of people.
And mulling over its effects on the cannibalism taboo.
You gotta tell them, Silent Breed is people!
But one thing is for certain. There is a global plan to cut meat consumption because we're told it will help save the planet.
Now, I know when we've had this debate about energy emissions and we talk about electric cars, people don't really understand where the transport push is coming, but it will be to stop petrol and diesel vehicles. And of course, straight after that, once we've done energy, we've done transport, is what we eat, in particular agriculture. They want to see us stopping to eat meat. In fact, there's a formal position from the UN about meat-free days per week for humanity.
While the media is throwing Extinction Rebellion in everyone's face every other 5 minutes, here's a protest you probably didn't hear about. At least we didn't. In October, some 10,000 Dutch farmers drove their tractors to The Hague to protest their government's court order to cut nitrogen pollution to be in line with EU targets, which the farmers say specifically targets them.
They've been told that the Netherlands has flouted its EU emissions, its carbon dioxide and nitrogen emissions, okay? And just by the way, if you've got to be vegan and vegetarian, you need nitrogen. So you either get that from animals or you get that from nitrogen fertiliser, which does emit carbon dioxide.
The Netherlands is the world's second largest agricultural exporter after the US. But due to its small size, Politico noted that its farms are nestled close to protected nature areas. Some Dutch politicians are now suggesting cutting the country's livestock population in half.
That there's another plan that would grant financial aid to farmers who cease their operations. This is a part of the protest. They're going to give money to farmers to stop farming.
Meanwhile, there's a huge push and promotion of plant-based meat substitutes.
You know, which I think is even a misnomer. It's not meat, it's plant-based patties or whatever, and they're trying to convince people that this is superior, this is better. But what happens when that happens? Well,
a mass switch to these highly processed industrial products actually means a further concentration of power over the world's food supply into the mega corporations that can actually produce them.
Small agriculture, farmers, cattle farmers, chicken farmers, poultry farmers, whatever, they're pushed out, and control of the food chain moves away from those smaller suppliers to big corporations that can both control and create the plant-based material, but also then process it, because of course it's not just like sending cows to an abattoir to make these plant-based products. It's a complicated laboratory type of thing.
I'd really like to see a transition to a plant-based food system. I think that's vitally important.
In terms of the meat ban and stuff like that, we need to eat locally. If we can't eat meat, then we have to eat locally. We have to eat within our means. And it's understanding that we are continuously taking more resources than we can. So there needs to be more of an education about what we need to take. And then this is what a kind of thing like a citizen assembly can look at in terms of what legislation needs to be put down.
These people are talking about citizens' assemblies and world democracy, and it's beyond governments, it's global and all this stuff. But what they're actually doing, if you think about it, is very, very undemocratic. You know, we did yoga in the street, we shut down traffic. The government must do what we say. No vote, no referendums, no nothing. Part of my issue here is I feel like she's sitting there and she's talking about how all these people are going to die.
Billions of people are going to die.
People are going to starve and die, but then they want to put in austerity measures that will most assuredly cause people to starve and die. I feel like these are middle class and upper middle class people whose worldview is very limited and has obviously been very propagandized. You know, telling people to eat local is a joke in the world that has been built. They have done everything they can, especially here in the United States, to disincentivize small family farms and to put in these horrible industrial CAFO lots, which are bad for the animals, bad for the environment, and bad for the people that eat from them. And by the time you tell someone to eat local, which sounds really great on a bumper sticker, right? For a lot of poor people, that's going to be whatever quote-unquote grocery store. And some of these grocery stores that we have in this country especially, I don't even know how they count, because the food that they're selling is garbage. It is completely lacking in nutrition garbage.
If you're craving this 660 calorie, one serving, 33 gram of fat, 10 gram of saturated fat dish, you get 196 plus ingredients for $2.22.
If I was going just to buy sheer numbers of ingredients for the lowest possible price, I mean, I know there's a little bit more in here, but this is only 48 cents.
That would be a great value.
And I get 172 ingredients.
Thank you, ConAgra. There's less than 12 types of MSG on this ingredient list. I'll give you $5.
But that's how our entire food system is set up. So that is why you have people in poverty having really high levels of autoimmune diseases and diabetes and all of that, because the food that they can afford to eat is crap. Have you ever just had a moment where you go, you know, I really wish I had some benzene, but how do I get benzene and how do I make it? Oh, you know, I can just go get a fruit soda with citric acid and sodium benzoate and leave it in my car for a day in the sun.
Have you ever gone on, not a murder spree, that's not fair. Have you ever gone on a spree where you spike things, food, objects, whatever, with things that could kill, maybe, but then you leave it up to chance, but you just keep going and going and like, nobody's stopping me, whatever. It's business, this is good.
That's why, and that's how they've set up our food system. If you want to eat healthier food, you got to pay. You got to pay more. That's how it works. If you don't want to eat something that's genetically modified and covered in synthetic endocrine mimicking pesticides and everything else, you got to pay. And guess who can't afford to pay? You know, I lived in poverty for a long time, my entire childhood growing up, and I still am having health issues today from the foods that we ate at that time because it's what we could afford. What we could afford. And I have issues now, and all of my issues, I am absolutely certain, are based on that form of eating because that's what we could afford to eat. There's slow kill going on in the food system. The entire thing is structured that way. If you have money, you can afford to eat better, then you don't get as sick. But the people who can't afford it, because they're eating whatever they can get for $1 at their local quote-unquote grocery store, because that's all they can afford to get to, because they don't have extra money to go, to the nice neighborhood, to the Whole Foods or whatever, and pay some marked up price for the organic version of something. Those people are getting sick. They've been given a slow kill death sentence from the food system. And so that whole thing would have to change from the top down. I've known so many people in my family who've been devastated because we don't come from a lot, and we've had to eat what we can get, and it has made a lot of people sick. I got people dying way before their time over in here, and it's just, these people obviously have no frame of reference for that when they're just like, well, you got to eat local. On one hand, you're all upset because millions of people are going to die. But then you want to put in forced austerity measures, which will most assuredly be the death sentence of lots and lots of people. I drove here today to show you guys this. See all that trash? See all this trash right here? See all this trash that looks like somebody just took an industrial dumpster and just dumped it out in the middle of the parking lot? See that? Take a guess where I am. What's the first thing that pops in your mind? You can't see it because it's behind that tree, but I'm in a Walmart parking lot. Now look around. Look at all these cars. This place is packed today. It's always packed. I mean, this place is always packed. All these Walmarts are always packed. Any Walmart you ever go to is always packed. Do you think all of these people are coming here because they want to? Do you think they're just willfully ignorant? They're like, I'm going to save me some money. I can't wait to destroy America. Do you really think that's what's going on with all of these people, every single one of these people? No. Look at this parking lot. It's freaking trashed. Why? Because these people don't give a shit. Why? Because they hate freaking coming here. They wish to hell they could shop anywhere else. They don't want to freaking come here. Nobody wants to come here. But you know what? This is what most people can afford when they gotta buy stuff. Why? I don't know. Maybe it's because our people that are running this country shipped our manufacturing base overseas. Maybe it's because only 47% of adults even have a full-time job in this country. The rest of us all got like 2 or 3 part-time jobs just to make ends meet. I got 3 right now, 3. People don't come here by choice. They're not coming here because they just can't wait to give their money to China. People don't have any money. People don't come here because it's a choice. People come here because they don't have the money to shop at like trendy Target. And by the way, Target, it's the same freaking thing. All that stuff's made in China too. They can't even act like it's not. This is garbage everywhere because no one gives a shit about this place, just like it doesn't give a shit about this country. But nobody has any money to go anywhere else. And the people that come here are throwing a whole TV dinner into a bush because they don't give a shit. They hate coming here. And until we stop just judging everyone and start actually pointing fingers at the problem, this is never going to get any better. It just never is.
If you really love the planet, you should be willing to live in as small of a space as physically possible. That's why I've converted a room in our house to my daughter's new bedroom. Because Al Gore says we have too much space. It's actually just a closet. We've got to protect the Earth because humans are using up all of the Earth's resources. And even though there are mega corporations that are spewing bioavailable heavy metals and poisonous chemicals into the environment at a rate that we could never as individuals match in our lifetimes, it's been shown that single-family homes really are the problem here. The social engineers plan to double all the mega regions across the country by 2050. People are going to need to learn how to live with a lot less. I mean, look how cool this is. This is awesome. What kid wouldn't want to live in such an awesome, cool, trendy, hip room? Humans have too much space anyway, and nobody wants to feel all that yucky green guilt. Among other things we've been doing as a family, we've been practicing breathing less so we don't use as much oxygen. I try to breathe mostly through my nose. Besides, she's gonna need to make sure she's paying all her carbon taxes. It's because we exist. That's what's destroying the planet, okay? I've read this. I saw it in Mother Jones. So, actually, we have to take bicycles a lot, which for a family of 4 is kind of tough on the highway, but I figure if I accidentally get killed, that'll just be one less human hurting the planet.
One of Extinction Rebellion's posts on their Instagram actually claims they don't shame and blame individuals.
Ice caps are melting because of you and your stupid car!
And I feel like that's a semantics argument to mean specific people, because if you're upholding IPCC climate science, regardless of whether or not it is flawed, whether or not there really truly is a consensus on it, which there isn't, then what you're actually upholding is the idea of man-made climate change. You're saying that it's humanity's fault for the way that things have been done, which is shaming and blaming individuals for existing. I'm just saying, they automated mass consumerism after World War II through the use of television and the media and everything else. They automated it, and then they blame the people for being consumers and for existing and for buying all this BS instead of the mega corporations that produce it, the governments that legalize it and allow them to produce it, and the media that's paid to propagandize it. You want to fix the planet, some very fundamental things are going to have to change about how things are being done. Living in this time where they're lowering standards, they're forcing austerity, and they're making it to where people can barely get by, change isn't going to happen with that. That's not going to work ever.
Experts have a consensus around getting net zero by 2050. You're saying 2025. One critic has said it would mean the confiscation of petrol cars, state rationing of meat, and limiting families to one flight every 5 years. And that was actually on a 2030 target. Do you agree with that?
I agree that we need to do whatever it takes.
I don't think that ordinary people should be flying at all. I think it should be purely for diplomatic and scientific purposes.
But you don't think anybody should be allowed to fly apart from diplomats?
Well, I don't know about allowed to fly. I think it should be just made too expensive.
So driving and going on an airline becomes the playground of the elite and the rich.
If our cities were constructed in a way that meant you didn't have to travel very, very far, then actually cycling and walking would be not only getting you to where you needed to be, but
what about if I want to go on holiday to Austria or, say, Australia because I want to go and visit some family? How do I get there?
By train.
And a lot of those major corporations are the ones that have funded major environmental movements in the past. It's something called conscience laundering. That's what they do. And then those movements continue to point the finger at the individual and not the said corporations who just so happen to fund them. Do you see how that works? That's how it works. If they really wanted to change anything, you would have to start at the top with the way things are being done. Not at the individual level, telling a person who drinks out of a plastic straw it's their fault. And the highlight of that is the fact that you now have scientific publications like MIT, Technology Review, and stuff like that. They're coming out now and they're saying if we switch to fully organic, that's going to be bad for climate change. I mean, this is the height of idiocracy. That is the height of stupidity. And that's what they're pushing. That's the science, right? That's the scientism area. They're coming out and saying that stuff. And another thing I want to point out too is they don't really seem to be too concerned about the insane pollution of our environment by man-made electromagnetic frequencies, which affect every single living thing that exists here and our environment and our weather and everything. It affects everything. You know, but they don't talk about stuff like that. They don't talk about the stuff that actually needs to be focused on to make real change happen. The Extinction Rebellion got kicked off on Halloween 2018. Well, back in June 2018, it came out that the UN was running out of cash and facing urgent cuts, according to the head of the UN. He said that the UN had never faced such a difficult cash flow situation this early in a calendar year, and that the cash shortfall was unlike any that they'd experienced previously, and that they should not have to suffer repeated brushes with bankruptcy. So I think it's really weird timing that happened in June 2018, and by October you suddenly have a climate crisis and we're all gonna die. And now there's this movement that's getting kicked off. Do you see what I'm saying? It's a little bit, and the movement is pushing UN Agenda 21, 2030. They're pushing teaching IPCC climate science in classrooms.
I rise today to recognize the importance of teaching climate change in schools.
I mean, it's just right there.
Extinction Rebellion not only seems keen to push the United Nations IPCC as if they've never heard of ClimateGate and the falsification of scientific data and all the red flags that raises about everything else that's supposedly factual, but they're promoting and ushering in Agenda 21, the 2030 Accord, and all these other agreements, despite the fact that it turns the planet into one giant technocratic control grid. As Windows on the World points out, Gail Braddock, one of, if not the main organizer of #Extinction Rebellion, is a former director and now in charge of program development at Citizens Online, where she works as a, quote, digital inclusion strategy specialist. The board of directors at Citizen Online also contains a former head of ExxonMobil, as well as Lord Anthony Tudor St. John, who's heavily invested in the same satellite and aerospace industries, who will be involved in the rollout of planetary-wide 5G coverage. Strange bedfellows our media darling environmental activists keep: oil barons, plutocrats, financial oligarchs, MPs, lords of the realm, etc. The climate change policies Extinction Rebellion are pushing for Agenda 21/2020 are the survival strategies of the oligarchs in the post-oil, sustainable future they plan for us. Smart grid compact cities, 5G connected to everything, monitoring us and controlling those who misbehave. Much of the land becoming an eco-reserve, a no-go zone. And that is what they're pushing for.
I mean, a lot of us have been screaming for years that the way things are being done is not the way they should be done. I'm sad because it feels like, once again, it's people who are joining into something in this sense of righteousness and this sense of spirituality that they think they're going to contribute to this thing. And I feel like it's not honest. And these people are being incredibly manipulated. So you have three things that are going on here at one time. You have a portion of society who has been propagandized for decades now, every generation since at least the late 60s, early 70s, with this idea that the earth is dying, that it's man that's causing it. They change the reason every decade or so. Oh, it's the hole in the ozone. No, it's acid rain. No, it's global warming. No, it's climate change. I mean, they change it. It gets changed every so often. It's the same idea. And the rhetoric has gotten more and more dire and apocalyptic and dark.
After I told the students they're soon going to die if they don't rebel.
I've seen young girls on television, part of your demonstration, particularly the school ones when they take the day off to demonstrate, crying because they think they're going to die in 5 or 6 years' time.
No, it's not necessarily.
Crying because they don't think they'll ever see adulthood.
Dangerous climate change and the extinction crisis, the crisis of many, many species going extinct as we speak, if they're not stopped, will mean that you do not have normal lives like your parents have. This is about whether you have a future. People probably sometimes ask you, what are you going to be when you grow up? But we've reached a point in human history where the question also has to be asked, what are you going to do if you grow up?
And yet there is no scientific basis for the claims that your organization is making.
To the point that you have people now, especially in the more impressionable younger generations, who haven't been paying attention long enough to realize that they do this and have been doing it every single decade for decades now, who are living in this world where in their reality that they actually live in their perception of it, is that the world is about to end. It's the apocalypse, not a biblical apocalypse, just a man-made environmental apocalypse. Eco-apocalypse is what I've seen them call it. And they really believe the world is about to end. They actually really do believe that. They're living in total fear.
This civilization's finished. It's finished, you know, whether you like it or not. If we have 3 years of really bad El Nino weather events, the food systems are fucked and we'll be fighting over cans of beans.
So they're at that level mentally every single day, living in fear that this is what's about to happen. At the same time that is going on, they have really stripped spirituality out of modern society, especially modern Western society. They have given people a lot of false organized religions with a lot of empty rhetoric and a lot of empty ritual, and humanity naturally yearns towards spiritual connection. So you now have people who are yearning for spiritual connection because the spiritual knowledge has been stripped away, and they're living in total fear that the world is about to end. So they are primed then to be fed into this pseudo-religious, spiritual, earth-worshipping cult type of thing, right? Where the earth is more important than you. There's too many of you on the planet.
We should invite fewer people to be born.
A spokesperson told a press conference this week, we're going to blockade and shut down every single road going into Westminster. Now, there's a major hospital, isn't there, on Westminster Bridge? Are you worried about how it could impact patients or families trying to visit, their loved ones?
Well, I think it's about this understanding of the wider perspective. We have people on the bridges who can have conversations with people who are trying to get there, and there's potential of, if people really need to get there, about letting them through, possibly.
Because we have had cases, haven't we? I remember back in July.
Incredibly sorry. We didn't mean for our protest to affect your life in this way.
Someone saying that he missed being at his father's bedside when he died in Bristol.
Yeah, and that's really, really unfortunate, and it's totally heartbreaking. And when you think about it, it makes you feel absolutely dreadful. So there is no way that we want to be doing this. We've been forced into this position by the lack of action from governments for the last 30 years.
I'm not trying to say that it's not deeply concerning the environment, but his very specific pain about not seeing his father, he might not really think that was comparable.
I totally understand that, but what we are having to do is shift the conversation from us as individuals, as we live our individual lives, to looking at that mass death, mass famine and starvation.
So feel green guilt that you exist at all, and then give yourself over to this pseudo-spiritual movement, and then they're going to take these people who are living in total fear, give them a fake religion, they're going to whip them into an energetic frenzy, they're going to suck that energy off like psychic vampires and use it to help magically bring about this new reality, which is the third part that's been happening alongside this environmentalist movement since the 70s, is moving us towards this worldwide tax, track, and trace control grid that they've been trying to bring in this entire time. This is where all of this is headed. So they're going to use this mass energy of these people who are living in total fear, participating in these rituals they don't even understand the occult nature of, and they're going to whip that energy up, and they're going to use it as a group flow to bring about this future that I don't even think a lot of the people who are involved in this understand. Has nothing to do with saving the planet. It has nothing to do with it. It doesn't. This is about control. This is about world government.
Well, tonight, a teenage figure who's become synonymous with the fight against climate change is coming to life here in the Bay Area.
At the newest addition to the San Francisco skyline, a mural designed to draw attention to climate change.
It's the so-called media and political elites that are indulging in misleading, anti-intellectual, emotive and ideological campaigns. This is no more obvious than in the climate change debate. But instead of debating facts, science, economics, technology, costs and benefits, and of course policy options, the United Nations hands the floor over to a hysterical teenager.
And while everybody was busy focused on Greta having her childhood stolen at the UN Climate Action Summit, nobody really paid attention to the fact that Mark Carney, governor of the Bank of England and frequent Bilderberg attendee, he pretty much goes every year, I think, also gave a speech at the Action Summit where he said, quote, "A new sustainable financial system is being built that has the potential to amplify the effectiveness of climate policies of the governments and could accelerate the transition to a low-carbon economy." But, he says, the development of this new sustainable finance is not moving fast enough. And trust, the Bank of England is one of the most powerful financial institutions that exists. And they're saying the development of the new sustainable financial, you got to look past all these buzzwords and look at what he's actually talking about here. the development of this new quote-unquote sustainable financial system is not moving fast enough for them. So, surprise, surprise, that in the same year Bilderberg meets, and on their key topics for discussion, you have a stable strategic order, you have climate change and sustainability, and the future of capitalism. Among the key topics for discussion, you also have all of this stuff that's happening. And just like that, banks worth $47 trillion have adopted the new UN-backed climate principles to fight climate change. And it actually says, under pressure from investors, regulators, and climate activists. Under pressure from climate activists, some banks have acknowledged the role lenders will need to play in a rapid transition to a low-carbon economy. Because as we all know, mega banks always bend themselves to the will of activists. This is about bringing about a new world order that they have been working towards for a very long time. It has to do with control of humanity. It does not have to do with saving the planet.
Member of Parliament, Denmark, Ida Aachen writes, "Welcome to the year 2030. Welcome to my city," or should I say, our city.
7 billion people now on the planet. We're going up to 9 billion. Think about 3 billion people entering the middle class, all wanting cars, mobile phones, computers, eating meat. I mean, this is a huge pressure on the resources we have.
But she's also hoping that people in the near future will own nothing. I don't own anything. I don't own a car. I don't own a house. I don't own any appliances or any clothes. I sound like I'm from a Dr. Seuss novel. Everything you considered a product has now become a service. We have access to transportation, accommodation, food, and all the things we need in our daily lives. One by one, these things became free, so it ended up not making sense for us to own much anymore.
Why you want to own a cell phone if you can just lease it? Why shouldn't you lease your refrigerator or your washing machine or your dishwasher? Or why do you want to own it? Why don't you want to go into a business model where the company owns it? The company owns it.
She says that you don't really shop anymore. It's more of a choosing of things just to use and to borrow. And that she used to find it fun to actually pick things out for herself. But over time, she found the algorithm did it for her better and knows her own taste better than she does. We don't pay any rent because someone else is using our free space whenever we don't need it. She writes, "My living room is being used for business meetings when I'm not there, and once in a while I will choose to cook for myself. It's easy. Even the necessary kitchen equipment isn't owned. It's delivered to the door by drones within minutes."
Or if you take a drill, it's used 15 minutes. It's not a lot, is it? And most of us, I know there are some guys here that really love to own a drill. But for the rest of us, we just want a hole in a wall, right? And I think we're going to a place where we just want mobility, where we don't care so much about owning a car. It's actually a little bit of trouble. If you just come to driverless car and pick me up and I can drive around and this car will be driving all the time.
Things could be taken away at a whim, but even this parliament member from Davos writes about the pitfalls. Once in a while, she writes, "I get annoyed about the fact that I have no real privacy. Nowhere can I go and not be registered. I know that. I know somewhere everything I do, think, and dream of is recorded. I hope that no one will use it against me." But she still insists that this is a way better society, and you realize one fatal flaw. What happens if they don't like what I say? And what happens if I don't like or believe in what they do anymore? What about my rights, man? There is no guarantee of freedom or absolute respect of rights at all, including privacy. And everything shifts according to what is already acceptable and what certain people wish to make acceptable.
There's no limit to the number of things that they will be able to control in a society where the majority of everyone owns nothing. If you don't follow the rules, They can turn your access off like Sandra Bullock's life in the movie The Net.
The theme park ride would become torture rather than entertainment if you were never allowed off of it.
I've seen this very succinctly put as astroturfing the way for the fourth industrial revolution. And I think really that sums it up pretty well. What this is actually about to give way to is a global governance, a world governance, and not just any world governance, a world governance run by AI, by artificial intelligence. The way these protests work is to appeal to their fellow humans emotionally in the street. They're carrying banners that say things like empathy. Guess what doesn't have empathy? Machines, computers, AI. Those are things that don't feel. And when a world governance system is put into place, which is everything we just saw in the entire 20th century has been bringing us towards this moment.
The number of people in the world has increased as much in the past 50 years as it increased in 1,000 years before.
Every continent, all facing disaster if we don't find a solution. The basic cause of the problem is people.
To continue along this pathway could lead to the end of our civilization. This is the other part of the population problem. The fact that every child born in the developed country consumes 20 to 30 times the resources.
Improved public health has caused the world's infant mortality rate to decline by 60% over the last 40 years. The world's average life expectancy has increased from 46 years in 1950s to 63 years today. As individuals, we can only applaud. However, the result of these positive measures is a world population that has risen during the same short period of time geometrically to almost 6 billion people and could easily exceed 8 billion by the year 2020. The negative impact of population growth on all of our planetary ecosystems is becoming appallingly evident.
So you've got a thing on the left, CO2, that you want to get to zero, and that's going to be based on the number of people, the services each person's using on average, the energy on average for each service, and the CO2 being put out per unit of energy. Probably one of these numbers is going to have to get pretty near to zero. That's back from high school algebra, but let's take a look.
Pope is consistently pro-life. I'm consistently pro-death. I'm for the death penalty. I'm pro-choice. I'm for assisted suicide. I'm for regular suicide. I'm for whatever gets the freeway moving. That's what I'm for.
All right, wait.
It's too crowded.
So
the planet is too crowded, and we need to promote death.
I'm thinking of instituting an award for all those young women who are healthy, who are capable of having a child, but choose not to have one.
At the basis of it all is this colossal increase in the human population. It's one of the living species of the planet, but it's reaching plague proportions.
What do you see as the biggest challenges in conservation?
The growing human population. Because if where we are, there's nothing else.
And do you have views about what should be done about that?
Can't you guess? Can't you guess?
When a system like that is put into place, if you disagree with it then, your protest isn't going to mean anything. Where are you going to go? When there's a world government system in place, where are you going? Are you going to get in a spaceship with Elon Musk and go to Mars? There's no appealing beyond that. That's it. It's a world government. That's the level. Yeah, I don't think these people realize what their energy is being actually used for. And I mean that in every sense. I think a lot of these people are thinking about this in very superficial terms. A plus B equals C. But this is some 7D chess quantum math that's been going on for a very long time to bring this about. And cares not for the superficial way that all of this is being interpreted. This is being brought about on every level, and that includes an occult, esoteric, spiritual level. And I wish it was about fixing the problems with pollution and fixing the issues with the way that this system is run. But this is about a problem, reaction, solution to bring about something that's going to be even more tyrannical than the already broken systems that we have in place now at the national levels, which in many ways are superficial at this point anyway.
What would be something that you could say is a victory, you're going to call off the disruption, that's enough?
A victory would be the leader of the government, the opposition parties coming together and accepting to go through Parliament a bill based on our 3 demands, that they will tell the truth about the emergency we are facing, life on Earth is dying, that they will aim for the most extreme carbon reduction target possible, 0 carbon by 2025, and then to enable it to happen, to give legitimacy to those asked, we have a citizens' assembly, we upgrade our democracy. We've seen it failing with Brexit. We upgrade our democracy so that those plans can pass, and we have a citizens' assembly to do it. Because if we don't do that, we don't have a future. It's that simple.
But you can see what is being done here. I mean, to get into this group is like being initiated into a secret society.
It's very hard to step out of the society that you're living within. It's very hard to separate yourself from your friends and your family who may well be catching flights, who are, eating roast dinners every Sunday. If you separate yourself, you then become different.
That isn't secret. And then you participate in rituals, but they're going through the same initiatory process. And the way that the mission statement is written is in this twilight language where everything has multiple layers of meaning. I mean, it's the level this has been taken to. I've just not seen anything like it before.
While it is true, almost nobody wants things to continue as they are and have been, and no one wants to do harm to the environment, and a lot of people are very concerned. There is no serious look at holding corporations accountable for continuing to produce toxins that poison humans, animal and plant life, and the environment at large. Do we care about the environment? Or do we just like looking at cool animals? If an impression is all you can breathe in from these spectacular views, then breathe it in. We've polluted in places you'll probably never even get to see anyway. Our crudest forms of energy production is now greenwashed in environmental views you can't help but love, giving you a general positive feeling about the environment and our corporation is one of our most important propaganda messages, because we care what you think. Policies like carbon credits have become little more than a token exercise in guilt transference or conscience laundering, while giving a total pass to continue the same deadly status quo. No serious questions are allowed about the admitted spraying of our atmosphere or the use of harmful and otherwise questionable pesticides and herbicides and mass agricultural practices which contaminate our land, our water, and our bodies, for example. They already have quietly admitted that creating small-scale farms, even on a global scale, would empower individuals economically while producing a greater abundance of higher quality food than the current mass agricultural practices. Not to mention there are other reports showing the potential to fix the environmental damage that's been done by decades of big ag and Monsanto and many other companies sort of grouped in with that. And yet, even in recent weeks, they've been publishing reports and feeding it through the mainstream science and mainstream media that if the world went fully organic, it would somehow be, quote, bad for climate change and thus for the earth. And therefore, they're basically endorsing a continuation of high use of pesticides and a destructive monoculture big agri system, which is, of course, what corporations want. They're actually telling people in the media that going organic would be bad for the planet if everyone did it. It simply does not get any more ridiculous than that.
This is Monsanto's Roundup. It's in cookies, breads, corn, crackers, chips, breakfast cereals, and beer. The list goes on and on.
For years, farms have used plants genetically modified to survive Roundup. It allowed farmers to soak their entire fields with the weed killer.
Chemical widely used on crops and even on home gardens to kill weeds. Now, thousands of people are suing the company, claiming it caused their cancer.
University of Washington researchers found exposure to glyphosate, the chemical in Roundup, raised the risk of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma by 41%.
The findings grew after the World Health Organization's International Agency for Research on Cancer, the IARC, said the key ingredient in Roundup, glyphosate, is, quote, probably carcinogenic to humans.
A California jury ordered Monsanto to pay $289 million in damages to Dwayne Lee Johnson, who says his terminal cancer was caused by spraying Roundup while working as a school groundskeeper.
$2 billion. That's how much a California jury has awarded a cancer-stricken couple that used Roundup extensively.
Monsanto stands to lose billions.
I've been soaked in it a lot, Roundup on accident, and according to the label and the EPA, if you use Roundup according to the label, there's no risk of cancer at all.
The EPA's bottom line is that glyphosate is safe. Wisely realizes Roundup is about more than health. This is about money. And there are big winners, like the organic food industry. The company which makes Roundup, Monsanto, stands to lose billions.
But then again, there's no serious conversation about the negative effects of electromagnetic frequencies that have been bombarded across the planet for decades and are having an effect on the lives of every living thing on the planet, the atmosphere, especially the oceans.
We're opening up the entire microwave spectrum. That's 3,000 frequencies. Every single one of these frequencies do not belong on Earth for a reason.
And of course, individual behavior matters. Of course, there needs to be some level of individual accountability, but the focus is pretty much backwards, and they're focusing on the wrong thing, I think, while they're moving everyone into a giant global structure of high-tech tracking and behavior modification, likely involving a healthy carbon footprint tax that will do what exactly? Make the rich richer? Give lip service to Westerners that they're planting trees in Africa to make them feel good inside, but fail to add shameful and horrible facts like that they've been actually caught burning down indigenous African villages in order to do that.
When Aaron first told me about this, I just couldn't wrap my mind around it. It isn't that I didn't believe him, but I just couldn't believe that this is the level. According to an Oxfam report from 2011, some 20,000 Ugandans were forced out of their homes at gunpoint, and their homes were burnt down in order to plant the trees for the carbon credits. According to the company's proposal to join a United Nations Clean Air program, the settlers living in this area left in a peaceful and voluntary manner, quote unquote, but the people remember it quite differently. I heard people being beaten, so I ran outside. The houses were being burnt down. Other villagers described gun-toting soldiers and an 8-year-old child burning to death when his home was set ablaze by security officers. They said if we hesitated, they would shoot us. More than 20,000 people were evicted from their homes in recent years to make way for a tree plantation run by a British forestry company. In this case, the government and the company said the settlers were illegal and evicted for a good cause, to protect the environment and help fight global warming. The case twists around an emerging multi-billion-dollar market trading carbon credits under the Kyoto Protocol, which contains mechanisms for outsourcing environmental protection to developing nations. The company involved grows forests in African countries with the purpose of selling credits from the carbon dioxide its trees soak up to polluters abroad. Its investors include the World Bank through its private investment arm and the Hong Kong and Shanghai banking corporations HSBC. It just really doesn't get any more sickening than that.
Promoting platitudes filled with buzzwords like sustainability, etc., seem to basically distract us and give the global elite something positive to say as the system concentrates wealth more and more in the hands of fewer and fewer individuals at the top.
Are you a government leader struggling with saddling debt, swelling populations, and yet full of untapped resources and looking for a better way? The Multinational Billionaires Club can help. Simply implement austerity, tax hikes, coercive population control, and appoint selected cabinet members to watch your economy grow with boundless opportunity. You pay nothing for the first 3 years, after which your tax base pays only 17% annually. Sign up today. No strings attached. Just kidding.
While actually lowering the standards of living in every developed nation for the middle class and poor alike, and pretending that this is all about healing the earth when it's actually what it has always been about: depopulation and control.
Billions of people are going to die. I can't believe I'm saying this. You know, look, I look around me at all this electricity. I came in an electric car, I went through London, and yet we are facing a catastrophe and we need to act.
But you would have to stop, to reach your target, you'd have to stop all flying. Aviation would come to an end.
Possibly.
It would reduce global temperatures using the mainstream climate models by 0.03 degrees. Most homes in this country are heated by gas. Most people cook with gas. The fact is, all of that would have to go in 6 years for a 2025 target, wouldn't it? All of it.
We put a man on the moon before we had the internet and mobile phones. Ex-NASA scientists calling it a planetary emergency. Lord Stern...
So no cooking with gas or heating with gas.
But we've had 30 years to think of better solutions, and now is the time to act to bring down those emissions, for it is too late.
Do you have a TV at home?
I don't think that's relevant.
Do your kids use iPads and computers?
It's
yes
not
or no?
relevant to
Can you answer these questions?
It's not relevant to the planetary
Do you have
emergency.
air conditioning?
It's really not about individual carbon footprints. This
Really?
is a systems-wide issue.
So when Prince Harry said everyone's carbon footprint counts, every footprint counts.
It does. It's really not about individual carbon footprints.
Every footprint counts.
It does.
You literally
And
just said the opposite.
The larger plan is one where the myth casts the individual human as the villain.
How do you subscribe to the theory that we just may be a virus and the Earth may be getting rid of us? We looked at the Earth as being a living organism. Are we the virus, though? Here's what I can say for sure. Okay. We are the virus to the ocean because we don't even live in it. Imagine if you could see an image of how many fish were out there 200,000 years ago versus how many are now. It's like they live next to a vampire. I bet we've killed 50% of all life in the ocean. That's what I'm saying, bro. Like we have to think of ourselves at some point. You gotta say, maybe the best thing human beings could do for the Earth is to end humanity.
Human beings are a disease, a cancer of this planet. You are a plague.
Indeed, the next epoch has been planned for decades, and it officially kicked off, I would say, in the 1970s. It got another serious boost in the 1990s with the UN conferences, and it gets reinforced every few years and definitely every generation, using a myth based on the idea that, quote, mankind is the enemy. And they actually published that, the idea that mankind itself is the enemy, in a Club of Rome report. Ultimately, this is about population control in every sense of the phrase.
The myth of overpopulation originated in England in 1798, when a vicar named Thomas Malthus, who fancied himself something of a mathematician, saw that food production increased incrementally, but people reproduced exponentially. He sat down and did some simple math, and summarily decided that the world would be out of food by 1890. He blamed reduced mortality rates, and recommended killing off the have-nots of society, lest the haves starve to death.
Written the same year that Malthus had declared we were going to run out of all food. This is an article from the Topeka State Journal, dated August 18th, 1890, titled The Hurtful Influence of Malthus. It says, few books have exercised so pernicious an influence upon the general development of economic thought as Malthus' essay on the principle of population, exercised for 3 consecutive generations. It appeared at the right time, like all books which have had any influence at all, and it summed up ideas already current in the minds of the wealth-possessing minority. It was precisely when the ideas of equality and liberty awakened by the French and American revolutions were still permeating the minds of the poor, while the richer classes had tired of their amateurish excursions into the same domains, that Malthus came to prove that no equality is possible, that the poverty of the many is a natural law, that population grows too rapidly, and the newcomers find no room at the feast of nature, and that the law cannot be altered by any change of institutions. And this part's key. He thus gave to the rich a kind of scientific argument against the ideas of equality.
This cry was taken up by Paul Ehrlich of Stanford University in 1968, who claimed that reckless human reproduction had overwhelmed the Earth. Massive famines would result, which would destroy, best case scenario, 1/5 of humanity by the end of the 70s. And the planet would follow. This fear produced large donations for the newly created UNFPA, which thrives on an imagined crisis that has been both imminent and rescheduled again and again over the past 2 centuries.
Which thrives on an imagined crisis that has been both imminent and rescheduled again and again over the past 2 centuries.
All this made sense when it was important for us to procreate for our survival. But now, for our survival, we have to not procreate. So for everyone to have quality of life, the number of humans on Earth needs to go down. And I believe that it needs to go down to 2 billion people. And I believe that it needs to go down to 2 billion people. And let's not be afraid to talk about overpopulation, because it is not about taking rights away from people. It is about giving opportunities to women, children, and future generations.
It needs to go down to 2 billion people.
And lastly, let's be part of the solution and choose from now on to bring forth no more than one child ourselves. Thank you.
What's really going on is the population is aging and not being replaced. So even though right now it looks like the population's growing, it's going to peak and then it's going to go back down. It's declining birth rates all over the majority of the world, and especially the developed world. Half the world's population is now below replacement fertility rate. And that includes here in America. We have fallen below our replacement rate. This is numbers from the United Nations from 2017. Look at this. You have very low fertility rates in Japan, China, South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, Thailand, Iran, Lebanon, Puerto Rico, Canada, Brazil, Italy, Spain, Portugal, Greece, Germany, Austria, Poland, Romania, Ukraine. None of these countries are hitting replacement rate for their people. So the math doesn't add up on all of the overpopulation scaremongering. What's going to happen is the population's going to peak and then it's going to start going back down. And they've put out various reports over the years guesstimating when that's going to happen. But most analyses say it's going to be sometime this century. So I think they're probably just going to keep scaremongering right up to the peak, though. But once it starts going back down, I think you probably will hit somewhere between TED Talk Lady and the Georgia Guidestones.
And I would also add it's about extending jurisdiction to a global level. It's the promulgation of problems that can't be solved by any one nation or group of people, so the boundaries are dissolved.
We need a worldwide global mobilization for renewable energy, conservation, efficiency, and a global transition to a low-carbon economy. And we can mobilize resources and political will. But the political will has to be mobilized in order to mobilize the resources.
And the power to organize and control that system goes to the top, to the global level, and everyone is supposed to fall in line because it's supposedly all our faults that this is happening.
Are we in a climate emergency, Ian Plimer?
We are not living in a period of extraordinary climate. We're living in a very benign climate. We are actually still living in an ice age. That ice age started on a Tuesday 34 million years ago, and it's still going, and it fluctuates between cold periods, glaciation, and warm periods, and interglacial. We are in one of those interglacials. Those interglacials are driven by that great ball of heat in the sky we call the sun. For some reason, a trace gas has nothing to do with our climate. It's the sun. Now, no legislation from Canberra or from the UN can change the orbit of the Earth.
And that's the path that we've been herded down. They're being funded in order to rapidly accelerate, whether they realize it or not, a future of human-directed evolution, a digital tyranny, and a high-tech enslavement with the reassuring, sugar-coated green mythos of sacrifice and salvation for the earth.
Lord Stern.
So no cooking with gas or heating with gas.
But we've
6 years'
had
time.
30 years to think of better solutions, and now is the time to act to bring down those emissions, for it is too late.
The capitalist system, the global system that we're is in the process of destroying itself, and it will destroy itself in the next 10 years.
This civilization's finished. It's finished, you know, whether you like it or not.
I'm really, really sorry to have to say this to you, but this is the truth, and I think it's too late for anything but the truth.
It's not just about the climate change. The climate change, the environment, that's only the kind of the proximate cover issue. The real issue, I think, that's really at the heart of this is about what kind of society are we? Are we, you know, a free society where individuals have control over our lives, or is this a society where we give that all away to very large organizations and governments that regulate and control what people do? And
show people that we're willing to sacrifice our liberty in order to bring this attention.
What's beautiful about Extinction Rebellion is people are coming together
we're going to ask you a simple question?
In sacrifice of their liberty.
Because there has been for a long time in the West a kind of an emptiness about what we are and what we mean and what we're all about, and that's been pushed through so many different avenues to schools elsewhere, that people look for some sort of thing to give them meaning, and it becomes this climate change thing, and then that becomes a whole sort of motivator for them, but then the society that they're creating becomes one that's actually quite less free, and that's where we're going with all of this.
I don't doubt for a minute that there's a lot of sincere people in that movement who want to do good, who think they're doing good. But what purpose and what aim are they actually serving? What is the actual agenda with this movement and with the larger Saving the Earth movement that we're seeing?
Those of you sitting here today have to decide if you're going to rebel and be the lucky ones, because you will escape the worst. The tragedy is what awaits for those of you who continue to sit there and don't face the pain. What awaits you are the horrors for which there are no polite words. Or as they say where I come from, you're going to be completely f***ed up. If you're interested in signing up, my friend Doug is there. Thank you so much for listening.
Some people have awakened to this and caught on to this, and other people, especially if it's their first time in activism, are really buying into what they admit themselves is a myth, that the Earth is about to be destroyed if they don't X and they don't Y and they don't XR.